The first time Remy scammed somebody, he made $200. He called me that evening and I could hear something in his voice I had never heard before. Not happiness, something underneath happiness, something that did not have a name yet, but that I would spend the next 2 years learning to recognize as the sound of a man who has crossed the line and felt the ground change under his feet and decided he liked where he was standing. $200. At the exchange rate that week, that was approximately 160,000 Naira in this Lagos, in this economy where we had spent the previous month billing a client 40,000 Naira for a full website build and nearly celebrated. Remy sent a lonely woman in Ohio a few warm messages and asked her for a small favor, and she sent him 160,000 Naira within an hour. He said to me, "Chukwudi, it works." I said, "What works?" He said he would explain later. He never fully explained until it was already too late for the explanation to help either of us. But let me take you back, because you need to understand who Remy was before you can understand what Remy became. And those are two very different people. Remy was my best friend since secondary school in Lagos. The kind of friend that life gives you once if you are lucky, and sometimes takes back before you are ready. He was the most naturally charming person I have ever known. We started a tech business together in 2021, a small office in Yaba, graphic design, website builds, IT support for small companies. Nothing glamorous, but it was ours. I handled the technical side. Remy handled the people. That was always how we divided the world. Those first 2 years were hard in the way Lagos is hard when you are young and building something from nothing in a city that does not adjust its pace for your progress. What I did not know then, what Remy kept from me with that smile of his, was how badly he was drowning underneath everything. His mother had been sick for almost a year. Kidney medication that cost more than we were making. His younger sister had dropped out of university because the fees had become impossible. His landlord had sent quit notices twice. And Remy came to our office every single morning looking like a man who had a plan. I did not know about any of it until it was too late. He met Tunde at a birthday party in Lekki, 24 years old, quiet, wearing a watch that cost more than my rent, driving a car that nobody in that party asked questions about because Lagos teaches you which questions not to ask. Tunde bought Remy drinks, took him out twice over the following weeks, gave him money here and there without explanation or expectation. Just enough to shift something in Remy's mind about what was available to a young man with the right approach and the right network. Remy came to me asking questions about VPNs, about untraceable emails, about how Facebook detected fake profiles. I answered because I thought it was research for a client. I gave him information I have regretted ever since. The target was a woman named Grace Hollis, 63 years old, retired school teacher from Ohio. She posted on Facebook about her roses and her grandchildren and her late husband Gerald, who had died 2 years before from a heart attack. She was lonely in the quiet, specific way that grief makes people lonely. Not dramatically. Just a woman who had loved someone for 40 years and was learning how to exist in a world that no longer had him in it. Remy became someone else for her. A widowed British engineer named Daniel, working on a contract in Lagos. Patient, warm. He learned what she liked and gave it back to her in every conversation. He remembered her grandchildren's names. He asked about her roses. He talked about his own fictional grief for a fictional late wife. And Grace, generous Grace, met him in that grief and held his hand from 7,000 miles away. 3 weeks of daily conversation before the first ask. He was having trouble accessing his bank account from Nigeria. Could she send 2 Apple gift cards just until the account issue sorted itself out? Grace sent them within the hour. And that is where we were when I started this story. After that first $200, Remy was different, focused in a way I had not seen him before. He started taking it seriously. He bought a better laptop. He studied everything. how to maintain a false identity over months, how to escalate trust incrementally. Over 3 months, he took approximately $4,000 from Grace in small amounts. Gift cards, small wire transfers for small fictional emergencies. $4,000 sounds like progress until Tunde opens his laptop and shows you his balance and laughs. That was when Remy went to Mushin. He went on a Wednesday afternoon, told me he had a client meeting. The man he visited operated from a clean, quiet house on a residential street. You did not find him by searching. You found him through people who had already found him and came back. Remy sat across from the man and told him what he wanted. The man listened without asking a single question. Then he gave Remy a list, not of money, of things, a piece of clothing from his mother, a piece of clothing from his sister, and one more thing that Remy could not finish describing to me without his voice breaking. Something that required him to do something to someone who had no knowledge of what was being done in their name and no way to consent to it. Something that could not be undone once it was done. When it was finished, the man gave Remy a soap, dark brown, wrapped in black cloth, tied with a red cord. He was told to bathe with it every morning before touching his phone. Not one morning skipped, not one. Tell no one what you have done. The soap will work as long as your commitment to the work is total. What has been exchanged permanently. There is no returning it. Remy carried that soap home in his bag and did not sleep that night. But in the morning, he unwrapped it and he bathed with it. What happened to Grace after that was not random. It was surgical. Remy had spent months building deep emotional trust with a grieving woman, and he now used every gram of that trust to build the largest lie he had ever constructed. He became a retired IRS officer who had discovered a large unclaimed inheritance in Gerald's name. Millions sitting in a federal account, processing fees to release it, bureaucratic complications that kept requiring more fees. Grace borrowed from her retirement fund. She sold jewelry. She borrowed from her children without telling them the full reason. It took 4 more months. By the end, Grace Hollis had sent $2.1 million. $2.1 million. The Mercedes arrived in March. Black GLE, new Lekki apartment, the wardrobe, the watches, the life that looked from the outside like a young Nigerian tech entrepreneur who had hit big. People who had never looked at us twice were now coming to Remy for advice. He told me crypto. I said, okay, not because I believed him, because I wasn't ready for what believing something else would require of me. That is my own truth in this story, and I'm not proud of it. But I was watching things nobody else was watching. Remy showered every morning before touching his phone, without exception. Hotels, my house, traveling. Every single morning without fail. He did not sleep well. He called me at 2 a.m. sometimes and talked about nothing for an hour because the nothing was better than whatever was in his head when the line went silent. He was losing weight despite eating well. His laugh had become a performance that his eyes did not always join. And his mother was getting worse. The medication was no longer responding the way it should. Doctors were using words like unusual and unexplained. Remy was spending money on her treatment, but the money was not helping in the way money is supposed to help when the problem is medical. I did not connect these things at the time. I connected them later, much later. Then in January, the EFCC came, 6 in the morning, 4 officers and a warrant. They had been building the case for 11 months. Grace had reported everything. Her daughter had helped her piece it together and file with the FBI, who coordinated with Interpol, who coordinated with Nigerian authorities. The chain of intermediaries Tunde had built was not as clean as promised. Someone at the top had cooperated to reduce their own exposure, and the thread they pulled had led eventually to Remy's door. They took his phones, his laptops, his documents, and from his bathroom, they took a dark brown soap wrapped in black cloth tied with a red cord. He was released on bail. The case was filed. The court processes began their slow movement through the Nigerian legal system. He was not in a cell, he was technically free. But here is what that freedom looked like. Accounts frozen. Mercedes flagged. Name in the newspapers. Lawyers he could no longer properly pay, arguing a case that was not going anywhere good. And underneath all of that, the soap was gone. Taken as evidence by officers who logged it as item number 14 in a list of seized materials and understood nothing about what they were holding. The soap was gone, and whatever agreement had been made in that quiet house in Mushin, whatever had been exchanged, and whatever had been promised in return for $2.1 million worth of access to a lonely woman's trust, the terms of that agreement did not disappear when the soap disappeared. They just found a different way to collect. It started with the sleep, which had never been good but now became impossible. Then the thoughts. Thoughts that arrived uninvited and would not leave. Thoughts that had no origin he could identify and no logic he could argue with. Then the conversations. He would call me and start talking, and somewhere in the middle of the conversation, he would lose the thread of what he was saying and become confused about where he was, or what time it was, or sometimes who he was talking to. I took him to a doctor. The doctor found nothing physically wrong. I took him to a pastor. The pastor prayed and told me privately that something was attached to my friend that prayer alone was not going to resolve. I tried to take him back to Mushin. The house was empty, clean walls, new tenants who had never heard of anyone matching the description I gave them. Over the following months, I watched Remy come apart slowly and then quickly. The Lekki apartment was gone. He moved in with me for a while, and then one morning he was not there and his phone was going to voicemail. And I spent 3 days looking for him before someone called me from Yaba. He was on the street near where our old office used to be, sitting on a low concrete wall, talking. Not to anyone specific, just talking. About dollar amounts, about gift cards, about a woman named Grace and her roses, about a soap that had been taken from him before he was done with it. He was wearing the same clothes he had left my house in 3 days before. He looked up when I got there and he knew me. He said my name. He smiled. Then he said, Chukwudi, I need to find the soap. They took it, but I still need it. I have not bathed this morning. I cannot work if I have not bathed. I sat beside him on that wall for a long time. I think about Grace Hollis sometimes. She planted her roses again. I saw it on Facebook, a photo, and 4 words. Still here, still growing. I think about Remy's mother, about the piece of her clothing taken to a house in Mushin without her knowledge, about what was done in her name and whether any of the money ever actually helped her the way Remy told himself it would. And I think about Remy on that wall in Yoba, talking to no one about things that only make sense if you know the full story. Wretched and bright-eyed and still looking for a soap that is sitting in an evidence bag somewhere in an EFCC office with a case number on it that nobody has closed yet. He is still out there. Some days he finds his way to my door and I feed him and he sleeps. And in the morning, he is almost the person I grew up with for a few hours before the thread sleeps again. The Mercedes is gone. The apartment is gone. The watches are gone. The money is gone. What the soap promised him, it took back with interest. And the streets of Lagos, which take you exactly where you choose to go, took Remy back to where he started. Except now, he cannot leave.